Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Coleman. I'm with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. I'm the community coach for the Illinois Connected Communities program. I want to thank everyone for joining today. We've got a great crowd, and today's topic is use. And we have three legs on our stool: broadband access, which is about infrastructure. We have broadband adoption, which is about increasing the number of people who can subscribe, increasing their skills, and helping it be affordable. And then a third category, which is use, which is how do we move up from just getting people basic skills to be more sophisticated use of technology to really get the full benefit of the networks that are in place. And I often say that this whole thing, when you think about community technology initiatives, you know, your infrastructure, your access is really like an exercise bicycle. But to get on it and to get full benefit of that network, you really have to get on the bike and pedal. And that's what the use category really is all about, is how to help people get more value from the network. And even on the affordability side, when we think about people deciding to make the investment in broadband subscriptions, the more people can use that to substitute, whether to drop their cable television subscription, to avoid travel and be able to access things from home as opposed to getting in a car and driving 10 or 20 or 30 miles to get a service, for time to be able to obtain goods and services, training, healthcare, without having to leave your home, all very high value. And that translates into affordability, because the more you can substitute the technology for other expense, and especially transportation and time, I think, the more valuable the connectivity becomes. And so across our 12 Illinois connected communities, we've got probably more than half that are working in some ways on the use of technology. It's probably the least popular of our three, kind of the shorter leg of the stool, because it's kind of, once you have good networks, you know, that adoption and use really become the big priority. So I wanted to now recognize the folks from the Leadership Council of Southwest Illinois. They're one of our 12 broadband communities, connected communities, because I think they've really now are on a good path to stimulate use in their region. And so we've got two representatives today from the Southwest part. We have Susan Schultz, who's with Webster University at Scott Air Force Base, and she's the chair of their use committee. And then Amanda Hornacek, who's a support person who works for the Leadership Council and is doing a great job at keeping lots of balls in the air. Southwest Leadership Council probably has 50, 60 people involved in their Illinois Connected Community program, and keeping people on track and on the right calendars, and keeping the effort moving going forward is a chore. You know, one of the old slogan about, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. The Southwest Leadership Council is really going together on this and is building a great coalition on all three of the pillars of this program. So Susan, I want to welcome you and Amanda, and I understand you're going to take the lead. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, and thanks for allowing us to speak to the group today. As you alluded to earlier, you know, the youth group, there's a lot of ambiguity because, you know, what do you do with this? And it seemed like the other two legs of this grant just, you know, had more purpose, and there was really, you know, they knew exactly what they needed to do. And then youth kind of set off to the side, and we really weren't sure what to do. And so we had a few members in the community that would join us for our youth committee meetings, and we would sit and talk about some of the things that we've heard, seen, and you know, not only in our personal businesses, but also in you know, with coworkers and colleagues and friends. And so we start putting this puzzle together. And one of the things that, you know, Bill really helped us with is, you know, just take one or two things, because you're not going to solve everything. It's such a big picture. But if you can just, you know, take one, two, maybe three things and just attack those, you know, maybe that's more manageable. And so just hearing that, you know, made us, you know, focus a little bit more. So when our group met, we talked about, you know, who was represented in the group and exactly what we thought our community really could benefit from. And we had the president of a hospital sitting on the group, and of course, healthcare is such a big thing, and moving forward, telemedicine and so forth. So we for sure knew we wanted to add that to use, and how telemedicine is impacted by use, or use impacted by telemedicine. And then of course, education. And I sit on several different education committees in the region, and we've seen it all, and you guys have heard it all. Earlier we were talking about kids learning virtually and from at home, and how that impacts the families, and you know, how well the kids do, the way in which the instructors teach and so forth. And then the third thing that we were looking at is we have a lot of, you know, businesses that it's impacted how they succeed and exactly what they're doing. And we have Scott Air Force Base literally in our backyard. And we saw, you know, even a cry from their perspective of not having the right technology or the broadband or even the know-how once COVID hit. And so we just decided to kind of tackle it in that way, bring some groups together. I know there's a couple of people in the education realm. We're working with not only educators from pre-K all the way to universities, but we're also working with libraries, and we're working with the workforce development, seeing what's done, you know, in our state and where they're at. And then also with the, you know, Illinois education system, you know, exactly what are they doing and what are they recommending, and hoping that we can put that all together for the education piece. And then I mentioned the healthcare. We have somebody who's working specifically on that, and they have a lot of little hospitals in this area, and they're attacking that portion. And then the third group is really government and logistics and just business in general, and what their needs are. So in the use subcommittee, we broke out into subcommittees, and it just helps us, you know, tackle this a little more easily. And then we come together and we talk about where we're at, what's next, what are our goals, what are our plans. And that's really where we're at on planning and putting things into motion. It is very exciting because I know the first couple meetings, there's a lot of kind of like, you know, glazed looks, blank stares, because we really didn't know what we were going to do. And now it's really exciting, and we feel like we have a purpose, and we don't really know where this is going to take us, but we feel very confident that we are headed in the right direction. So Amanda, I wanted to see if there's something you wanted to add to that.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to share with all of it is the survey part. So in addition to what we are doing with our subcommittees, we also feel that it's very vital to talk to our communities. So we have a survey that is going out to business and organizations. We have about 25 people that have completed that survey so far. We sent it out again yesterday, so we expect to have a good number of participants. We're collecting data through that survey. Each one of our surveys have adoption, access, and use components to the questions. This is all going to help us really share with our subcommittees what are some of the needs, and then pulling all of it together. In addition to that business organizational survey, we also are having an individual survey. And this survey is going to be targeting also use in a different way. We're asking questions, about how they're using the different mechanisms they have at home and what they have. And we're also looking at, with that individual survey, we have it now in a Spanish format also, because what we do know is that a lot of our communities that do need some assistance with broadband, they may not even have devices themselves to actually take a survey on a computer or an internet at their own home, or they may have to go to somebody else's location or take that at a library. So paper copies are available also at all of our local libraries. Are going to have paper copies, and then they're going to send us the results. So just kind of wanted to mention about the survey too, because that's going to be a component as we pull it in. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Amanda, because that is such an important piece, just to hear back from our community and see what their needs are. I haven't really even had a chance to talk to Amanda or Rhonda from Leadership Council, but I attended a board meeting just this morning for a local chamber, and they also sent out their own survey. It was something completely different about really how can the chamber help its members. So it had nothing really to do with broadband. But guess what we've discovered? Guess what the results said? And that was really, really kind of cool, sitting on the board and getting to see that insight, and still knowing what we're doing in Leadership Council. And some of the outpour was that I don't even think they knew what to ask for. We started asking, like, I wonder if they're talking about technology, they don't have the equipment. Are they talking about they don't have broadband, or are they talking about they don't know how to use it? And so there was certainly this, cry from our community and our business leaders, and we'll get dig a little bit deeper. And this survey that Amanda's referring to is certainly going to help us. And by the way, this survey is going to go out to all of our chamber board members. And not just a specific chamber, but really in our 9-county area. So that's really exciting. We can't wait to see what those results are, and that's going to help us move forward as well, knowing really what is it that our community needs. Did anybody have any questions?
I was just going to start off questions for you. As an educator, what are you anticipating you'll see from folks thinking about either delivering education services or receiving them?
I have to tell you, one of the things I was really proud about Webster was they started offering courses. They used, at the time, it was WebEx, not as popular of a modality as Zoom, but they used WebEx, and it was something that they were doing for the graduate studies or graduate programs, not the undergrad, but just graduate, and especially at the military sites. And part of the reason they were doing this was because if you look at our military personnel, they're moving all over the place, right? And if they get started in a program and have to relocate in a year or 2 years, sometimes it's hard to finish that program. And so to start fresh, another university is really taking them a lot longer to get their degrees. And so this worked out really well when we added this opportunity to learn this way. We did have some pushback from students because, kind of old school, where, I want the instructor right in front of me, and I want my student colleagues right next to me. But after doing this for a couple of years, and I'll tell you, we've been doing it for probably about 5 years now. And when COVID hit, it was a beautiful, beautiful thing for us. We knew exactly what we were doing. There was no change at all. And our students all of a sudden were so excited that it didn't put them behind whatsoever. It was just instead of coming into the classroom and learning this way, I can sign in from home. And now we're seeing our students really, appreciating this modality. And I'm wondering if they're going to ever come back to the seated option because they're still learning through asynchronous, right? There's still an instructor in front of them teaching. It's not like online. So there is an instructor who's, conducting a class at a specific day at a specific time, and they can raise their hand and ask questions. But now they're just sitting at home, or they're sitting in their personal office, work office, what have you. So I think we're going to see a whole lot more of that. Our online courses, I know when COVID hit, we had for our undergrad, there's not a whole lot of undergrad, and this is really, I want to say, true in higher ed in general. While you do have some universities that are fully online, you have a lot of universities that just have a few online undergraduate programs, and I think that's going to change. And that's going to change, and that's going to mean that the students and faculty will need to know how to use these modalities and this technology. And then, of course, is broadband strong enough so that they can access the courses that they need to log into? So certainly education has been impacted by COVID, and it just hit us a lot harder. I think we were moving in that direction just in general, just not as quick. And I don't think we'll be turning back.
Good, thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Very well, thanks. Other questions from the audience? That's so interesting about the chamber survey that you were talking about, and wondering how many chambers are saying, if you think about chamber operations, which is all about networking and getting together and so on, 2/3 of their function has kind of disappeared, from
Right.
weekly or monthly luncheons. And so the idea of using your chamber as a way to reach your business community and working with groups that are already engaged in trying to make their community more vital, that's a great pathway for that. Who's your chair of your business committee?
Amanda, do you know that?
I don't know of anyone that we have with a chamber that sits on ours, but we could definitely add someone. But in a lot of ways, the Leadership Council is very similar to a chamber. We're very different than a chamber, but we also are a member-based organization. We held lots of meetings like that. So kind of the different things that you guys are talking about are really parallel to how we operate too.
And what's interesting, Amanda, just want to add that our executive directors for the chambers, our local chambers, are members of Leadership Council. So it's all very nicely packaged in a nice support system. The chambers certainly value Leadership Council and likewise. And so I just so happen to sit on one of the chamber boards, and that survey went out. Like I said, had nothing to do with technology or broadband, but that certainly was a cry. So it was very interesting to see. And I'm not surprised, and probably nobody on this call is surprised, but it just reinforces what we're doing is certainly of value.
Good. Any other questions?
I'll turn off my angry face so that everybody feels comfortable to ask questions.
So, I just think that you're doing a nice job, and I think it is important to just bite off what you can. I think that's a great message. There's a lot going on here, but if a community could say, we really want to target our business community and say, how can we help our business community be more innovative and work smarter around e-commerce and so on? Or conversely, how do we work with our older adults in our region and maybe on telehealth or just social activities and so on, to help the nonprofits or county agencies that work with older adults. And we know that, especially with the pandemic and now that winter's here in Minnesota where I live, the idea of, well, let's go, having 80-year-old women go out for coffee on a 30 below zero day, drive in from the farm or something to a coffee meeting, or walk around the neighborhood when it's super cold. That's just something you can avoid, and people get isolated. And so how can you use these technology tools to either have a morning coffee or maybe an afternoon aperitif, right? To have a little social interaction, maybe both of.
Susan, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sure.
And Susan, I may have missed this, but when you were talking about the survey, what types of feedback have you been getting from businesses to this point? I guess my question is, are they really thinking about critically how they could expand, grow, develop, improve with the use of technology? Or is this something that you really have to push them into that space?
Well, we actually, our target question really had nothing to do with technology whatsoever. It was more of, what can the chamber be doing for you? And as Bill alluded to, we used to have a lot of business after hours and luncheons and all that networking sort of thing, opportunities to sell, your business and to have a face in front of your business has disappeared. And so we're wondering, as a chamber, what exactly is it that we can do to still be strong, still be a strong chamber and help our businesses? What is it that you need? And so that was where we were getting some of the feedback that, they recognize that online is the new way of doing business.
Sure.
And being able to, sell their business and create this image, virtually is now the way we've got to do business, at least for the time being.
Okay.
Susan, how many businesses were surveyed?
I know this went out to all of our chamber members.
Mm-hmm.
So it was over 500 members. Val, I don't really know how many people responded, and I can certainly get all of that information and share that. And I certainly will do that with Leadership Council. But this was, something I just attended this morning and learned myself. But I know that it went out to about 500 businesses, and not really exactly sure how many people responded.
Okay, because I sit on the board of the South Shore Chamber of Commerce, and sometimes it's hard. Our businesses are still challenged with transitioning, the idea of transitioning digital anything versus thinking, forward thinking about broadband. That's like, what is that compared to?
Yeah.
We should at least turn on the internet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think some of them are still trying to figure that out too. What exactly does that mean for their business? And while, some businesses weren't really impacted as much as others during COVID, there's some that had no choice but to get innovative and try to figure something else out. Otherwise, their business was going to fail.
Right.
But you're right, Val. I think that a lot of businesses are looking for that. What do we do next? How do we do this?
Right.
Because it's also new.
Right. That's why I was wondering about the number, because you will have, in my estimation, and this is the cost that I have on the business, have more of newer businesses that are very interested in Wi-Fi, internet, how do they streamline their business from day to day versus older businesses. Do you all find that to be the same?
I think just in general, that's probably true.
Okay.
And so I want to clarify too on the survey. So the Leadership Council has sent out a survey now. They just sent it out yesterday to businesses and what they call their organizational survey. So it's businesses and chambers of commerce and nonprofit organizations and so on, to see around the whole broadband issue. And the idea that Susan was at the chamber meeting and connected, and they're doing kind of just a member needs survey, but it's
Right.
coming back broadband, you know. So it's one of the goals for your community should be to think, how can we infuse a little broadband technology discussion and throughout our community? And I think that with the pandemic, that's happening a little bit naturally. The responses come back to help with internet, help with e-commerce and so on.
Yeah, I agree with that, Bill.
Any final question for our Leadership Council of Southwest Illinois? Thanks.
Thank you
Val,
for
your
letting us
question.
talk this morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. Next on our agenda is Robert Bell. And Robert is one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Forum, it's a think tank group in New York that now for probably almost 20 years, I think, has been helping communities think about technology based futures in their community, starting with work that they did in Canada and then created an international movement around the intelligent community method. I've known Robert for about 15 years or more, I think now, and helped implement the intelligent community effort in a suburban community here in Minnesota, in Dakota County. We're excited to make the top 21 communities, the Smart 21, 3 years in a row. And we're never able to make the top 7 or the Intelligent Community of the Year. And but used it very well to organize our community economic development efforts. We've also been using the approach here in Minnesota with communities of all sizes as we think about how do we get better broadband, why do we want better broadband in our communities. So I'd like to introduce Robert Bell.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you very much all for having me. It's really exciting to hear what's going on in specific communities. I never really get tired of it because it's an adventure that we're each undertaking. I also want to really compliment Susan and Amanda and Bill as well for talking about taking this problem one step at a time. You know, do one thing and make it successful, and you should be amazed at the energy it provides to do the next thing, and then the greater energy it provides to do the next thing. So all problems can be broken down that way. Now, I'm, however, going to take you to the other extreme because I'm really taken by the fact that we've got 3 legs to our stool, and broadband, you know, built, the infrastructure is one and adoption is another, and those are the ones that have got everybody's mind share, and that's normal, by the way. But if you think about it, those are temporary. Use is actually why you're doing it. You're not doing this for the fun of building some infrastructure. You're doing it because you want to have 30 or 50 or 100 years ultimately of prosperity and growth come out of this. And so what I'm here to talk to you about, presuming that I can make this all work, let's find out. Come on. Let's see if sharing is successful. Yeah, Bill, you're gonna have to enable me to share.
Oh, sorry. Nancy, can you do that?
Or Nancy's gonna have to enable me to share. Sharing is nice, Nancy. Try now, Robert. Yet, but that doesn't mean, I'm hoping that I don't have to exit and come back in. We'll see here. Shouldn't have to. Not getting it at the moment. And that's fine. I can just talk to you. It's just that, you know, I've got all these pretty pictures.
Try now.
Not yet.
Well,
son of a gun. Shows you that we should have been testing, right?
Nancy, you there?
Come in, Nancy.
Nope. So try one more time.
Not seeing it.
Okay.
I'm
Robert,
going to talk.
can you email your presentation to me?
Well, yes. Well, maybe. See how big it is. Gosh, Bill, it's a big ask. I just turned off my email. Now Outlook has to start again. Anyway, what I want to talk to you about in the time allotted is really the issue of where do you go from the fact once you get your operating, your infrastructure operating. Let's see if this thing is emailable. Bill, never mind. I don't want to take people's time anymore. I'm going to talk, and I'll be happy to share this afterwards.
Sorry about that.
That's life. We didn't test. It's our fault. We are at ICF two things. We're a network of about 180 plus communities around the world of all different sizes that work together, and of all different populations, by the way. Our smallest one in our network is about 10,000. Our biggest is about 12 million. And they get together to pursue economic development together, and not just economic development, but really a new approach to it. We're also, however, advisors who do what I'm doing today. We bring this method to people. Bill mentioned awards, and we certainly do that, but we do a lot else because in over 20 years, we've built up quite a lot of information about how communities do this thing well. So as I mentioned, I'm going to take it to the other extreme of use, because use is ultimately what it's all about. And I want to start with a story about a little place called Mitchell. Mitchell is a city of about 15,000 people in rural South Dakota. And for a very, very long time, Mitchell was all about exactly one thing, and that is farming. In fact, the largest building in town is the Mitchell Corn Palace, and it's quite a remarkable thing from the outside. I haven't had the pleasure of visiting it myself, but it's a beautiful building. But there's a problem with having farming being your major, if not only, industry, and that is because we've been automating and mechanizing farming for so long. What it produces is not jobs, it produces a few wealthy farmers. And so that's not a very good foundation for trying to grow your economy over time. So starting back in the 80s, Mitchell put together a strategic plan, as any of us would do, and they did some infrastructure improvements, and they built some new schools, and they built a new hospital and unified their healthcare system. And that produced some results, but it didn't really change things. And then in 1989, through no effort of Mitchell's, 17 telephone co-ops in the area got together and formed what they called the South Dakota Network. And that South Dakota network was all about connecting government facilities. So it was this big broadband network before the word broadband was even in use that was connecting the schools and the hospitals and the government offices and the fire stations and so forth. And the reason that mattered is because it, for the first time, brought some of these communities in South Dakota this experience of what high levels of connectivity actually mean. So a few years later, they're blessed by having an institution in town called the Mitchell Technology Institute, which has got some very, very forward-looking people running it. And Mitchell Technology Institute led an effort to get a publicly funded fiber to the premise network in place. And they had a great plan, and they promoted it really well, and the city got behind it, and they put it in front of the voters. And in 1997, the voters voted it down because it was too expensive, it was too weird. Why would we do a thing like that? MTI was stubborn. They kept pushing. And they ended up doing several things. They built a communications technology center to train their students, because they saw their job is to train students for the jobs that are going to be there. They saw that this was going to be an important source of employment. And so since they're very proactive, they want a grant to upgrade that center into what's called a network operations center, which is a telecom term. It's where you run the network from, right? And where a whole bunch of companies go and locate their equipment so they can exchange traffic with each other. It's a sort of the hidden plumbing of the internet, if you will. Well, because that was there, that soon began to attract other carriers to locate their own equipment there. And all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, over time, this little place became a hub for the community, for the surrounding region. And that produced an evidence of demand. that interested a South Dakota telco into building that fiber network that the people of Mitchell had voted down all those years before. And they started building that network in 2005. And then you have to ask yourself, so what? We've got a network. We can't, in 2005, we can't watch Netflix because it isn't online yet. So what are we going to use it for? Well, what Mitchell ended up using it for was to create a new economy about information technology and networking on top of their farming economy. And they went at that step by step. One of the things that happened was that MTI, with the help of the city, opened a career and technical education center to really make this we're going to train you in technology. A local university trained students on, worked with them to train students on the skills that their research had indicated would be in demand in the next 5-10 years. By doing these things, again, with the city's very eager participation, Mitchell gradually became a Midwest magnet for talent. So this little 15,000 person city sprawled over a pretty good area is now home to consulting and software companies that have created hundreds and hundreds of jobs. On the strength of that, MTI, the Tech Institute, was able to build a $40 million technology campus that was a dream come true for them. That little university set up a health sciences and entrepreneurship center. And a local angel investor network has sprung up because there's companies to invest in now. So when you talk about use, yes, you absolutely want to have projects to help your local businesses get online. Small companies are terrible laggards in adopting technology. That's a great place to start. But the place that you're going is really kind of magnificent because of the distributed nature of the internet, the kind of economic activity that we're used to seeing in big cities like New York, San Francisco, and so forth, can happen pretty much anywhere. And this is sort of the message that we're out there preaching all the time. And in addition to the fact that it's an exciting opportunity, it's also, frankly, the only way you're going to survive economically in the future. Back when Mitchell did that strategic plan in 1980, I was here for it. There were no personal computers. There were no mobile phones. There was no such thing as this thing we call the internet. Although fax machines really, really hot, they were the technology of the day. You fast forward to 2015, and the world shipped 260 million computers in just 1 year. Android, iPhone, they put this thing in your pocket, which is called a phone, but it's actually a supercomputer by the standards of 1980. You've got billion-dollar e-commerce companies that came out of nowhere, social media companies that came out of nowhere and have completely overturned retailing, the news business, publishing, and now broadcasting because of video streaming. And it looks like the movie theater industry may just go down in flames over a period of time. So we're in this period of huge disruption. And I've got just a number for you that I think captures it all. Back in 1990, so we're going to go to not 1980, but 1990, the three biggest automakers in the United States, GM, Ford, Chrysler, did about $65 billion in sales measured in 2015 dollars. And I'll explain why in a minute. $65 billion. They employed 1 million people to do it. That's a lot. If you fast forward to 2015, my second point in time, you've got three companies, Apple, Facebook, and Google, together generating $1 trillion in sales. And by the way, 2 years later, Apple was doing $1 trillion all by itself. But three big companies, $1 trillion in sales, and they employ 137,000 people. 1 million people in 1990, 137,000 people in 2015. We're seeing incredible employment disruption because the jobs of the new age don't take as many people. Those industries are incredibly productive. And yet, they're the industries that we want. One of the most frightening statistics I ever saw came out of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the sort of the club of the 30 rich nations in the world plus Mexico. And back in the financial crisis, which we all remember way too well, they did a study that proved that 50% of the long-term unemployed, people who've been unemployed for at least 6 months, were people who had left school at the earliest age that they could. Now, that all makes sense to all of us, right? We all know that, but what a gut punch. 50% of those people. And they're now trying to get a job in an economy that demands more and more skills, and not just skills in a research lab or the management suite of a company. Skills in the coffee shop where the barista has to keep the Wi-Fi running, or the warehouse where everybody has to be using digital equipment, right? So you don't have those skills, you're not going to get anywhere. And we've already seen this huge division in our country, which is what our politics is all about, between the people who've got the skills and the knowledge and the breaks to get good jobs, to earn good salaries, and to live in nice places, versus the folks who are stuck in menial jobs where they can't really add much value to the job. They're just, they're basically a cog in the machine, and they get paid in proportion to that, as a result of which they live in bad places and they don't have much of a future. And that's a terrible, terrible thing that we're carrying around with us. Literally, the answer is in the hands of folks like you who are working at the community level to change what we use broadband for. So that's the mission. It's not just a little thing, it's actually an enormous thing that's in your hands. We have developed something called, let's see what time, I just want to make sure I'm not running over. We've developed at ICF something over the last 20 years that we call the ICF method. And the ICF method basically says that the ways in which we've traditionally developed our economies are great, but they're not really working in this, what we call the digital age. They're not working as well as they could, as well as they used to. And instead, what we've seen, and this is all just evidence-based out of communities we've studied, there are 6 fundamental things that communities need to be working on in order to have a viable economy. And they are, first of all, having that broadband connectivity, because it's the new road. I mean, Mitchell was on Highway 90. That was probably what kept it going for all those years. Broadband's the new road. And it's the place where the money comes in, increasingly. Where the education comes in. I mean, so many things coming out of it. And COVID, of course, demonstrated that to us all. So that's the beginning. But on that foundation, you need to start building a skilled workforce, a workforce that has the skills to earn decent wages at the jobs that are going to be created. And you need to be thinking about, well, what jobs are going to be created, and the great reference to the older companies in our community and the new companies. The older companies are run by older people. One of my favorite stories ever told me about this was in a small community, a business owner, old line business owner, been there a long time, didn't want anything to do with the internet, hired a young woman out of college who kept trying to convince him to put his stuff online. He's like, no. So finally she couldn't take it anymore, and she just went out and just set up a website for the guy and enabled it for e-commerce and started selling stuff online. He didn't know. So about 2 months later, he comes to her and says, what's going on here? My sales are going up and up. What's going on? And she finally, confessed to him shamefacedly that she'd gone behind his back to do this. Well, not surprisingly, this gentleman became a convert to the power of the internet to boost a business of any size. So he became that skilled person. He began to become that skilled person. So I've talked about connectivity. I've talked about this knowledge workforce, these people with skills that you need to cultivate. Innovation is an odd word to use in most communities. When I tell community leaders, mayors, members of council that do you have an innovation strategy? And they look at me and say, really, what are you talking about? I'm quite serious. A Nobel-winning economist named Robert Solow won that prize for proving that 80% of all growth in our economy, 80%, 80, comes out of either creating new technology or using new technology. And nobody had ever known that before. Nobody ever figured it out. So it really kind of confronts every place in the world with a really simple choice. Do you want your share of the 20% of growth that comes from doing the same old thing? Or do you want your fair share of the 80% of growth that comes out of doing something new? The answer is obvious, right? And yet, again, most, particularly small communities, don't think they even have a shot at this. And yet again, I'm here to tell you over and over again, because we're living in a digital age, that's actually the greatest and most powerful advantage you've ever had in the history of your community. And it's really important to put it to use. So that's three out of 6. Connectivity, your workforce, your innovation. And the rest of this is all about taking care of the place, because if you successfully go down those roads of use, you will find that you're creating disruption in your own community. And disruption sounds great when somebody in Silicon Valley says it, but it basically always means that somebody gets hurt. So intelligent communities, as we call them, also focus on the other side of that. So they work on the issues of inclusion. How do we bring people into this? How do we train them? How do we give them a reason to care about digital technologies? How do we make sure that they have the equipment that they need to make it work? Huge work, right? It's got to be done, because not only is it the morally right thing to do, but quite frankly, we can't afford the problems we're going to create if we ignore it. They work really, really hard on engagement. And this is actually was going to be one of my biggest points. We're used to the idea of engagement. In fact, we talked about it just before I began talking about a survey. We're doing a survey of business. And that's a very typical, good approach to beginning to gather information and begin to create a bit of a dialogue with the people in our community that we need to talk to. Because we all know that if you don't base your plans for change on what people care about and what they're afraid of and what they hope for, they're going to stop you dead. Just like the voters of Mitchell stopped their broadband platform dead because it didn't make sense to them. It seemed like a lot of money and a big risk. So you need to work to overcome those fears and misconceptions. But you also, more importantly, and this is the biggest opportunity brought to us in the digital age, is you have the opportunity to tap people's passions and creativity and to do it very inexpensively compared to the work and time involved in going out and really having a zillion one-on-one conversations or small group meetings and working that really long, hard process. You need to do some of that, but you also need to give people a digital way to engage with you, because as somebody, a really smart person in Adelaide, Australia said to me, it's what scales. It's what lets you go take that one-on-one conversation and turn it into a 1 on 100, a 1 on 300, 1 on 1,000 conversation. So that engagement element, unless you do it, you're going to be stopped dead. And of course, I know that's part of what this grant is all about, what this whole program is about. And then finally, sustainability, which seems kind of an odd thing to throw into the middle of this. But first of all, sustainability, of course, is about local quality of life. We like the quality of life we have, we hope. We certainly want it to be better. And that is something that passionately engages citizens. It creates a channel through which you can activate excitement and interest, because we do care about the quality of life and how can we make it better working together. And finally, sustainability is going to be probably one of the most fast-growing industries in the world in the next 20, 30 years. If it's not, well, we won't be around in another 100 or 50, 200 years. So why would anybody ignore that as one of the 6 pillars? So we have developed roadmaps in each of these areas, which I'm not going to get a chance to share with you right now. And again, I'll be happy to share with you later. But what I want to leave you with is really encouragement to think extremely big while you're doing the one project or the 2 projects or the 3 projects. Be thinking about the fact that they're actually part of a much bigger idea. And there really is ultimately no limit. We've seen communities of all sizes do this remarkable transformation from stagnation and sometimes severe decline into a reverse of that, and then really strong growth. And with economic growth, which is by itself, it's really important, but it's certainly not what makes the place great to live in. I mean, Silicon Valley's got all kinds of growth, but it's a really crummy place to live in that people are fleeing away because they've just let it go get completely out of hand. And it's, by the way, a terrible place to get a hotel because it's going to cost you 6 times what you're used to paying, but that's a whole nother story. But these days, the growth in your social structure, your health, your interconnection among the people who live in your community, the businesses, the institutions that work there, and the growth of your culture, your unique culture in your community are just as important as economic growth. In fact, they are increasingly what help contribute to it. At the same time that growth in your economy makes your society stronger and your culture stronger. And that's really important to remember, because that's what makes your home a great place to live. It's what makes it a great place to work, to start a business, to raise a family, and to hopefully create a really bright future for that place. So this method is, as you can see, I'm a bit of an evangelist. This method to me is how local communities all across the world, of pretty much any size and pretty much anywhere, although there's limits, obviously. We don't have any intelligent communities in Nepal so far. Can really begin to chart a very different destiny. And it all begins with this broadband foundation, but that's only the starting point. What comes out of the rest of that is entirely limited really by your imagination and your willingness to, do some things that may seem a little crazy to people the first time they hear about it, but that prove their value over time. So I'm going to stop there. I will, as I say, share a PDF of this with Bill afterwards. And if you want sort of to dive into the details, you can go into Amazon and look at a book we just published. It's quite cheap, called From Connectivity to Community, which basically outlines this whole thing in detail. And I think may help you as you're thinking about use, how to engage people in use, see perhaps the bigger picture that I'm encouraging you to see. So thank you very much for giving me this time.
Thank you, Robert. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. Nancy always says, Bill, get their PowerPoints so you can.
Yeah, just and do you ever listen? Do you ever listen?
You know me, I don't listen. I'm not a good listener. And I'd encourage the Intelligent Community Forum has an excellent website as well, intelligentcommunity.org, where you can go in and get some great stories and profiles of the communities that they study. And one of the ways they study communities is they ask communities to send them information. And so there is right now the application window is open for the Intelligent Community of the Year. They hate the word competition, but of course it's, when you name an Intelligent Community of the Year, that is
a competition. Yeah.
And, but if your community completes the benchmarking questionnaire around each of those 6 intelligent community elements, somebody, economic developer in a community should be able to do that in a day or so, I think. So it's not a small amount of work, but it's not all that hard. But to tell your story about your intelligent community initiatives, and you might be surprised when you look, you might have some great stories to tell. But after that process, they do send you back a snapshot report that I think is helpful. We all like to be above average. We get a score, and you can kind of see how you're doing and use that as motivation to supercharge your efforts or to get your efforts moving. I encourage you to do that.
Well, thank you, Bill. Yeah, that questionnaire is on our website. There's no cost for any of this. We live on the data we get, so we want to make sure that we get as much as we can from as many sources. And yeah, that snapshot report is kind of, I always love it because communities that see it are kind of stunned that they score highly. Many of them are stunned that they score highly in a couple of areas. Like those are areas of strength for you. So the answer is, well, that's good. Let's keep those going. But what else do we need to do to actually step up?
Good. Do we have questions?
Hey, Bill, this is Kevin Kling. I just want to jump on and echo what Robert said. We're based out of Mitchell, South Dakota.
Are you? Vantage point, I thought so. Okay.
There you go. I wanted to jump in. I can tell everyone on the call, our employees, now I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but we've got hundreds of employees that are enjoying the full benefits of that fiber network built years ago. And also, Robert, Jackie Miss Kimmons, if you remember her, she did our presentation. She wanted me to make sure I said hello on this call, and she'd be an advocate for the work that you all have done and with Mitchell and elsewhere.
Well, thank you so much. That's great. I was looking at the thing behind you and going, Vantage point. Why does that sound so familiar? Okay.
Yeah.
Great to connect with you.
Did you recognize the Mitchell he described?
The Mitchell he described, I don't recognize the Mitchell he described because I came to work for Vantage Point in 07, but I definitely, I was in New York for the presentations and such, but I can tell everybody in these fiber networks don't just appear overnight. As Robert said, it's a long process that takes a lot of leadership. And but the fruits of that labor now, I mean, we've never missed a beat, and we've got hundreds of people working from home, and we've got a great big fancy building with nobody in it because they can all do their jobs from home. So a great big fancy building is by Mitchell standards as well, so not Metro East fancy building, but nevertheless, the fruits have come home, and we're making use of it, right?
And by the way, when we're talking about use, what you just said is really important. COVID-19 is going to change forever many things, and one of them is going to be the amount of the importance of traditional real estate development in your community. It's, you know, you have to start thinking about everything being a distributed structure. You're still going to need offices, you're still going to need these facilities, but there's not going to be that many people in them.
Well, I'm going to talk about that next. So,
all right, well, that was a good segue then.
Yeah.
Good. Last call for any questions. Good. Well, thanks again, Robert.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time today. Full disclosure, I'm what they call an analyst and a juror for the Intelligent Community Forum. So I'm privileged to look at the top 21 applications and help them get down to the top 7. And then also serve, generally I serve on the jury to help go from the top 7 to the Intelligent Community of the Year. And it's really amazing what communities around the world, the way they get their business, education, and governments working together, whether that's in a large European, say, or Taiwanese city, one of their small ones, just several million people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or in a community the size of Mitchell, or a town of 15 or 20,000. In many ways, it's easier in those smaller communities because it's more of a community, not a metropolis. So, and you build the resources to work at your scale. We've seen that in neighborhoods and cities and counties and regions. So I encourage you to take a good look. So thank you again, Robert.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And now I'm going to do a presentation, and I have been working with the Google small business people to participate with us today. And then last minute, they kind of bailed out a little bit. And so I thought, well, let's, how can we productively use this time? And so I thought, well, I'll just, you know, we're thinking about this, this transformation that's taking place now with COVID-19, driving use of broadband. And we've seen so many changes in business practices and social practices and so on, that the crisis has really helped us to overcome barriers that were in place over the last decade, stopping people from using some of the technology that's really always been there. And so we're going to talk about that for a little while, hope to have a good discussion on it. And then that will lead into our group discussion as we go. And so if Nancy is back with us now, Nancy, we've got a big group, so maybe we should have 5 breakout rooms.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. So 2020 is really a leap year in technology adoption. We've seen the use of all these technologies, people who had never done a video conference before, doing the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them a day. My work in Minnesota, where I traditionally have been a road warrior in my car, driving around. That was my plan for Illinois, to work with communities on site with groups of people in the same room, and meals before and cocktails after, or to develop relationships and so on. We're all doing business in a very different way, but it really is leap into it or lose. You know, if you say, well, we'll just have to wait to do that until the crisis is over, that might have been a strategy you thought, well, you know, but by April 15th of last year, we had to realize that the world had really changed. And so we've seen some tremendous changes in the year. You know, and this is the billion-dollar question. Robert was just getting into that. What new practices will stay? Which of these will grow or diminish over time, or just go, continue to change? And so if you have a office building where there was 200 people there, a year from now, how many people will be in that building? And I don't think the case is closed on that. I think there's going to be a lot of learning. I think that we're going to see the value of the face-to-face relationship building and the day-to-day interactions where the technology still falls short of what the human experience prefers. So, but it's going to be interesting to see. And just as I think about this, video is now the new phone. It's the car, the airplane. And somebody like Kevin, who's a technology consultant engineer working on broadband across the country, probably was at conferences for at least a third of his life, talking to different providers and communities. And now it's all done, from his virtual background there. So we don't know where he is. He could be in Jamaica, or he could be in Canada, or we don't know where he is, but he says he's in Wisconsin. So that well, we know what both Illinois and Minnesotans think about that. So but now that we've seen Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, WebEx as the primary way people are working together. And before, I had done some WebEx video conferencing over the years when I was working for the state of Minnesota. We used to organize video conferences, trainings where people from around the state of Minnesota would go to a location for a video conference meeting, that there were video rooms, and usually on state of Minnesota networks. And, every time we had some issues where a site couldn't connect or had problems. And but now we're doing this by ourselves in our homes and generally working pretty flawlessly, except for those who lack connectivity and then have to call in on their phones or audio only, or they have to call back in after they get disconnected. And especially if they have 2 kids in the other side of the house attending school and a spouse in a third room doing video meetings as well. What we've seen, here's the Zoom call increase from 10 million a month, which sounds like a lot before the pandemic. And Zoom probably thought, oh man, we're doing great. Look at, we got 10 million calls this month, to just 4 months later, 300 million calls per month. And you think about that kind of growth is really incredible. Back in 2008, video conferencing was the hot thing, and but people didn't like it, so people didn't use it. And so companies like Cisco and Polycom were pushing out their products, and really had very little use of those. People didn't like how they looked, and so they said, well, stretch pantyhose over your lens to make you look softer and nicer. So I don't know, I thought about trying that for today, but I decided not to. So and that these are some of the things, I don't need to read them, you can probably see them, but of course it was expensive. The bandwidth is still an issue. People talking over each other because of the delays in the systems, interoperability of systems, this idea of a video room. And so for 12 years after this article was printed in Forbes, those things kind of held. We all had these tools available, but very rarely did somebody say, oh, I'll call you, is what they said. They didn't say, let's Zoom. But now we've just become really part of this culture due to the pandemic. And some of that might be sociology that, oh man, let's see some other faces at least so I can feel like a human being. Again, that sociology of all this is really going to be a study of many, many doctorate theses over the next 10 years, I think. Here's working from home. In 1 month, we went from 15% of the people working at home to 50%. And you think about the effects on real estate and, of course, restaurants and business areas and the economic changes that are happening as a result of that. But we have seen businesses, and this gets Linda Young's point about the people changing the way they behave and the businesses, and how do we help businesses really step forward and make use of technology. For small retailers that jumped on and started e-commerce systems or improved them, they're seeing great holiday sales. And but the ones that are still lagging, they're hoping people are coming through their door, and but they're probably waiting in vain for a lot of that. And so it's a real really rewards those people who are online early, that had people who kind of listened as the trends were saying. No one was not saying, oh, the trend is for people to go to the mall. We saw what Amazon and Best Buy and Target and all the companies were doing with e-commerce sales over the last several years. And many small businesses jumped on and tried to hold their presence there. And others just kind of ignored it, thinking that doesn't apply to me. And so it is possible for small businesses and so on to thrive, but they have to get on board and make it happen. And there's all kinds of reasons that businesses don't do that, whether they're in south side of Chicago in an urban neighborhood, or out in Mattoon or Mercer County where it's more rural. Here's the one just saw as I was doing a little research over the last week on this. The good size that people, if they do have plans, they could really put them into hyperdrive and warp speed and focus on online growth. And so again, get back to that crisis as a mother of invention, and so on. The telehealth is something we've talked about. We've had a speaker at our last meeting talk about telehealth, and you can see that line starting in week 10 or 11 there, where telehealth visits just go into hyperdrive, and you can see that kind of change. And that you can see those on-site visits, the dotted line going down to the bottom. And so that's kind of what's happening in the early pandemic. But the next slide is going to be really kind of is interesting to look at what happens when people can go back to what we used to call normal. Is that telemedicine plunged almost 70% from April to July. When clinics did open, when hospitals did open, people said, well, I'd rather go see my doctor. And so maybe telehealth is more like takeout food. It's not a bad alternative, and in some cases it works pretty good. It might be your preference, but people like to go out to restaurants and have the ambiance and the noise, and have that food coming sizzling out on the plate, as opposed to in a cardboard box in a bag. And so it'll be interesting to see again the telehealth. What happens with the new normal? What is that going to be? So school use, certainly we heard from Susan about what's happening at her college, and we see that in every school district that's a part of this program, the immediate change from going to school in school to going to school at home. And I know Nancy has 2 kids going to school from her home today, and which might have explained one of our issues there. So we know that this is a real challenge for families and schools to make use of technology for that. And so once again, it'll be interesting to see what's possible in the future, what the trends are. Certainly when you have now the ability to go online and gather information, to go to school, whether it's Khan Academy for math homework, or whether that's online schools for kids who the existing school they have access to doesn't meet their needs for some reason, bullying issues, disabilities, the ability to go to school from home. Think of the learning that's gone on in terms of how to teach online over the last 9 months. And I think that's really going to pay dividends in the future. But the question really for you is how can you support this transition both today and into the future? So I came up with some ideas that I think are going to be meaningful to communities. And again, picking and choosing what it is you can take on will be important for you. And so on working from home, there's a lot of people who are working from home that's, as long as everything works fine, they're in great shape. But when things go wrong around connectivity or their computers, they really need technical support. And so what's in place in your community to support people who work from home? Are there people they can call to solve virus issues or connectivity challenges or software updates and so on? This is certainly working to ensure high quality internet services, not only in your towns, but out in the surrounding countryside is a critical part. Because when we think about people who say, yeah, I'd like to live in a rural community, or I'd like to live in a neighborhood, you want to make sure that those internet services are there that can support people choosing location for their home based on the quality of internet services that are provided. And some people do like a social atmosphere. They don't want to go into a big office. They may have a job in Chicago. They'd rather keep that job and then live in a different community, or vice versa, that people would rather live in an urban area or suburban area. This just gives people such a choice for where it is they want to make their home, whether it's due to family issues or they like the lifestyle of a given geography that doesn't match up with their employer. You can create these telework centers that can meet the needs of people who still want some social interaction and aren't content to sit by themselves for 8 hours of work a day. One of the things that in every community, there's people there's a mismatch. They may have skills, but there's no job for them in their home community. And so solving as a matchmaker for residents as a jobs program, now it used to be, oh, well, you have to drive in your car, what's a 30-mile commuting radius for a job? That doesn't really exist anymore for many jobs. And so how can you work with your workforce centers to find jobs for your residents, but making sure your residents have the skills to do those jobs is important. And then finally, and I say here, Mattoon here, that must have been on my brain, but it's just representative. There's people who want to live in a certain location, their hometown, or where their parents or siblings live, or grandkids live. And so finding people who want to move to your community and helping them adjust to life in your community, I think is important. Here in Minnesota, it's not a very positive thing. People say it's hard to move to Minnesota because everyone still hangs out with their high school friends. They say Minnesotans will give you directions to everything but their house. So you don't want to be known as that kind of community. You want to be welcoming to new residents. For e-commerce, one of the things that's been very successful in my work is the idea of subsidizing small business technology consulting so that people know whether it's to get a Google place claimed on Google so they show up on the map, or sophisticated e-commerce kind of activities. That's really important to be able to have those businesses feel confident they can move up that sophistication chain without taking large risks and poorly investing their time and money. Some things are easy, eBay, Etsy, Craigslist. People can move forward relatively easy and start to use those tools. Some communities really maintain an e-commerce portal for their community that you package up your artists or your ag goods or any other kind of things that your community is creating, and then sell those on a community website where people can come and say, oh, that Red Wing, I was just there on or whatever town, I was just there on a vacation and they had a lot of cool art or a lot of cool something or other. People can come back and shop at your businesses in your community after experiencing the bricks and mortar side of your community. something that Roberto Gallardo and Purdue Extension is working on is a social media strategy for communities. And I think it's really important to think about how can local businesses support each other. So if I'm tweeting about my business, that I could tweet about other people's business at the same time. And if everyone did that, then you're going to get a lot more notice, a lot more trending, a lot more leading from one business to the next in your community. And so that's really, I think, an emerging strategy for communities that, again, doesn't necessarily cost any money. It's just people coordinating and collaborating and sharing their followers. And one thing that is also important, when you have festivals and people want to sell things or buy things or tweet about your community, make sure you have enough connectivity there at the site.
McDonald's.
Oh, hello? Okay, so telehealth, looking at facilitating training for targeted consumers, whether older or less tech educated or tech connected, those reliant on public health programs. And then with a focus on wellness, wellness apps, community competitions for that, social interaction, whether it's Zoom coffee groups or happy hours, or even hobby groups around fishing or crafts or arts. And so I think there's a lot of loneliness as a killer, they say. And so how can you help community members avoid that kind of loneliness? That really does help community health. And then just be a source of public health information for online purposes. And so that was the presentation I came up with here today, to think about the different types of strategies that communities can promote to start to step up that use of technology. Any reactions or questions? Linda,
Bill,
go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say, it's just always so interesting to hear the same reoccurring themes in a lot of our discussions. And it does make me feel like, we certainly must be on track, because we're talking about the same things. And I think if we just keep plunging forward, we're going to get there.
Linda, how do you think you implement some of these things in an urban environment in your neighborhood?
So I was taking the ICF survey, Bill, at least looking through it a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And
rather than listening to me?
No, I was listening. I did that after the presentation from ICF. But it's interesting that some of the categories focus on some things that traditionally people wouldn't think that technology could be an assist on. Like when you talk about reducing or eliminating isolation and feeling so alone, most people say, well, no, technology is no good for that. And maybe it's all we have right now. And so it's interesting, some of the topics that I've looked and heard today on where technology can help our community.
Any other question in the bigger group? We're going to break into smaller groups now, and we're just going to do that randomly. And the question I'd like you to think about is, which sectors in your community have the most potential and or need for technology enhancement? Is that your business community, your nonprofits, your healthcare, your school districts? And what can your local effort do to help that? And so just have we're going to be in there for about 20 minutes. And so just have a great conversation. Ask you to maybe have somebody just kind of lead that discussion, the extrovert in the room, and keep the conversation going. And then be ready to just do a quick little report out with one or two kind of interesting findings. So
And I just wanted,
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
well, I want to add that when I open up these rooms, some of you will be able to just click join, and some of you might not see that join option, and you'll need to put into the chat box which one you'd like to join. Otherwise, I might just assign you randomly. So if I don't see a message in there, then I'll just assign you randomly.
Yeah. And those, everyone's going to have the same kind of topic, so they should be happy with wherever they end up. So we'll just stand by until that happens.
So some people are joining now.
For some people, this is my favorite part.
Yeah, I might also just start assigning randomly to speed it up.
Okay.
Hey, Nancy.
Hi there.
Hi, this is Ann. There were just two of us in our room. We were thinking maybe you could put us in a bigger room or.
Oh, sure.
So is this another breakout room? Or is this just the main session or what?
Hi, Lauren. Yeah, this is the main session. I think people
Okay.
are going to file back in here in any number
All
of
right.
seconds.
Okay.
Were you able to join a breakout room earlier?
Took a half a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, it can be a little buggy sometimes.
So what's gonna happen? Are we gonna do like reports from our breakout room, basically?
I'm not for sure. The agenda says that there will be an adjourn, so I assume he might ask people to, give some takeaways from their session, their small group conversations.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So somebody from group 2, be interesting to hear from your team about what you talked about and anything that was really exciting or so is there anyone from group 2 that wants to report?
I didn't recall what group I was in. Can you call the name?
No, but you just tell us what happened in your group, Linda.
Okay, so the sectors that we identified needing the most connectivity in our communities were our local governments, our city infrastructures, our educational institutions, telemedicine, and our businesses.
That's a good list.
So then we talked about what can our projects do to help. And we got a really good discussion around the local government. First question we started exploring was, is it more about access or use? And we came up with, well, perhaps it's both, because shouldn't local governments have an innovation strategy and plan? And in large cities like Chicago, how to make that plan stick and carry forth as the leadership changes. So we had a really good discussion around the local government aspect.
How do you think your local neighborhood councils fit into that, Linda?
So, you know what? This is one that I felt, Bill, that I wasn't going to even touch because I am totally inundated with the political leadership, the structure for the city of Chicago, because of course we have our aldermen who represent our local communities. But I think that mindset of being an innovator, of being that thought leader, it just isn't there. I think our leadership is still looking at city infrastructure as the sewer systems, the garbage pickup, the water mains, and I think technology isn't there for them. And so I'm struggling here.
That's interesting. So the I know Chicago just passed a referendum saying we're all in on broadband.
Yes.
Leaders should do that. So it'd be interesting to see if those neighborhood councils, which have more longevity maybe than the city government, maybe it's not so monolithic to think about that. But thanks.
Yep.
So Linda, you were in group 2.
Okay, so, great.
There you go. Yeah. Amina, what did you hear today?
Hey guys, so actually very similar to Linda with regards to talking about structure, that existing structure that we could possibly lean on for greater capacity or greater efficiencies. And that includes but not limited to the transportation, the educational assets that we have within our communities, meaning the school systems. Oftentimes they have broadband, Wi-Fi built into some of their structures that are either not at full capacity or not, unaware that the community itself may need to lean on those institutions for greater support. I was just telling the team that I was with on the call that my Wi-Fi was working just perfectly. However, my sister works in California, but she was staying with me until she felt more comfortable leaving, going back to work there. So her son was here with me, and then his father would come here to go through e-learning while she's here on Zoom calls. So you got like 3 people, including myself, using Wi-Fi, and it was every day was a problem, very spotty. A lot of people using the same Wi-Fi, and I'm sure that if I'm just usually by myself, my daughter and I. But you have multi-generational people living in the same home setting, particularly within African American Latinx communities, using the same, Wi-Fi infrastructure, which could, have a great burden on the usability. And I think, I have yet to see or hear, and not to say that it has not happened, but I have yet to see or hear the city of Chicago, that includes the CPS system, talk about the post-mortem or any challenges that they are experiencing through e-learning. I haven't seen it.
They probably don't want to say it because it probably isn't good.
Yeah, and I so I'm working on other projects. One in particular is a food security project, and through our documentary that is not complete yet, but we're just listening to the interviews. These are parents of children attending school, and all of them had problems with, even though it's a food related documentary, we were still asking, and like in this Anthony Bourdain-esque kind of documentary, about their home environment and what they're going through and the sacrifices that they've had to make, blah blah blah. And the broadband internet service came up at every single conversation, that it was spotty, unreliable. Sometimes their kids wouldn't be able to finish their assignments, and they just had to move on. And they didn't seem like they had any recourse in terms of how to get it resolved.
Good. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that. We've just got a couple minutes left. Anyone else excited about something they talked about? They want to share it?
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump back in here really quickly. We do have a new administration coming in, Biden-Harris. Is there a policy put forth that, because I know there's whole net neutrality and everything that kind of went out, that was compromised and not fully discussed because it was one administration that was in office. But now that we do have a new administration, is there an opportunity to kind of bring forth some of our angst and pain points with them? They seem to be a little bit more oriented to more inequities within the BIPOC communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, their broadband infrastructure is a lot of times seen as primarily a rural issue, where there's a lot of the money for infrastructure has gone to rural places, rural telephone companies, or even public sector initiatives there in the rural areas. And the urban issues have been really seen as more of a affordability question rather than the availability question. And I think you point out, and I was just doing some research on my own for a city here in Minnesota of 100,000 people, and the big company, I was on their website and finding addresses on a realty site and then plugging those in to see what kind of internet I could get from them. And there's very few places where it was more than 25 megabits from the big telephone company. And so I think these older copper networks that are in cities are seen as adequate, or there's a cable company that provides higher speeds but quite expensive. So I think it's to be more than 100 megabits. And I know in our discussions in Chicago and the Chicago suburbs, where the big, like the Comcast they say, oh, you can get the gigabit service, but not.
Yeah, I
really.
mean, this is what we kind of discussed in our group, was just this more general idea, and this is something that maybe, you know, how you say, the different components of this Illinois Connected Communities can kind of think about and contemplate. I mean, you know, just as a society, right, we are just confronted with all of these different, let's say, resources where there is this, you could say, tension between, you know, are these things commodities that, you know, corporations can be making a profit on? You know, are these really just like vital resources that, you know, we need as a society? Healthcare, for example, you know, and so now broadband becomes that same kind of a thing, right?
Yep.
And so, and what you generally approach, if you can think about like universal phone access, that whole thing back in the 60s and the 70s, right? This idea that, okay, somehow the government was going to kind of step in, and people who couldn't afford a telephone, somehow it was, you know, up to the government to, you know, provide that, right? So, you know, now, and I know, you know, Nathan has been the one that, you know, definitely got me informed on this, you know, this idea of what's the minimum 25 megabits. That's supposed to be like the kind of the minimum standard that the government is throwing out. Ridiculous. Come on now. 25 megabits. Come on.
Well,
And I think,
come on now.
yeah,
the upload speed is 3.
You know, come
On
on.
a video conference, that's
You know,
like
you got two, three kids, you know, trying to do remote learning, you know, somebody who's been forced to work remotely, who probably is also having like trouble just kind of getting up to speed with how to do all that at home, because they've just been used to coming in at work, hitting a button, and then, you know, their system comes on, and now they got to try to get all of this stuff together in the house. No, 25 megabyte, no, not acceptable.
At the same time, and I just encourage as we leave now today to think about, based on the existing networks that are in place, you know, it's kind of like having a bad bicycle, right? You know, that bicycle isn't the best, but you can still get on it and ride it. You know, you're not going to go as fast as somebody who's on a racing bike or whatever, but it is a bicycle. And if you keep the air in the tires, which is probably your knowledge about technology, you can make it work. Not as great as it should be, but just to put a little burden on ourselves about what we can do to improve people's ability to make use of the technology. So I'm not disputing anything you're saying about the need for high quality, great infrastructure, but that's kind of like saying, well, I'll get in shape, you know, once I get a great racing
or
bicycle.
buying a gym membership that, you know, it's kind of known that the whole fitness industry basically is based on people who buy gym memberships and don't use them, right?
That's right.
So it literally would be the same kind of thing with, you know, and I know Linda, we talk about, you know, our group talks about this a lot. Okay, so what that it's available on your street if it's too expensive?
I was just agreeing with everything that the young man just said. So it's going to be an ongoing problem. So if you've never done an inventory of how many things are connected in your house, then when your kids start coming in and their friends start coming in, you know, you greatly increase the bandwidth that you need. So just me alone, I've got probably 12 things that are just mine.
Well, and then one of the problems is that they start to, just because there's so much conflict, it's like when traffic is bad at the intersection and the light's out, those devices, you know, if somebody stopped and directed traffic, you could probably get it through, but these 12 devices, there's no one directing traffic. And so your devices start to conflict with each other, and it all breaks loose. Say our time is up, and we're going to stop recording now. And I really appreciate the conversation and the participation. I hope it's valuable for you. We're going to, this is recorded, and so we'll let we'll have the PowerPoints available, and Robert's already sent his, so Robbie's putting that up on the ICC website, and we'll get that available to folks. And remember, that's at the bentoninstitute.org or benton.org/ICC, and then the password is ICC. So it's a highly secure website. The Russians maybe are in there already on it, but everything will be there, including the recording probably tomorrow. So, and Janice provided an article in the chat, discusses, let me see that, plans for the homework gap and related issues. And Benton Institute released a big affordability study today. And they had a webinar on that, and I'm sure a link to that session will be on the benton.org website as well. So that be great information for people to share with policymakers. I think that policy question is big, both at the city level, the state level, and the federal level. And hopefully we'll see great new policies at the federal level, and even thinking about what can you do at the city level or state of Illinois level. I know your governor is all over broadband access, and affordability is critical to the success of the state. So we want to keep encouraging them. So the more you guys do to move your initiatives forward, the more we can show the governor that these community programs work and make a difference. So think about you guys as what do they say? The tip of the spear to broadband
Okay.
Illinois.
Right.
So thanks everyone. Have a great day.
This is Ann. I just have a question about the PCs for people. Was it announced, and will that move forward?
It was announced yesterday. It was announced. The governor participated for Cook County. And of course, we've already got that going in Southwest Illinois for the southern half of the state. So now we have 2 distribution points and we heard today from the Girl Scouts of Southwest Illinois about the tremendous interest that they have like 2 events a week where they're giving out computers, tremendous interest. One organization requested 500 computers, for their clientele. I wasn't sure what kind of organization that was, but you just think about the scale of the need to have a high quality computer in your home that can really meet the needs of your family. So
will you be contacting us about a Zoom call or whatever?
We will, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Good. Thanks for that question, Ann.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
we'll
everyone.
talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays.